session like Think Like a Hacker, Communicate Like Management. The reason for that title is it's very important to understand the hacker or the adversary to actually go into what he's doing. It's also very important to be able to communicate like management because we have some big issues. And actually, one of the biggest issues I hear around, it was not the biggest one, but one of the biggest, is actually the problem communicating to what we call C-level or management. And that I would like to stress a bit today. I will go into a bit of the management part, and I will also stress a bit on actually the technical part. But it is an opening session, so I'll try to understand that. What we see around is being able to communicate with management. It's really critical, because if we cannot get management to understand our technical issues or our CyberTek issues, it has a very big impact, or it can at least have. And this is what I think about when we are talking. We need to be better to communicate with management. I see this as not only to management, but we have a kind of a gap between the IT and the OT people as well. And I see this as 3 different languages or dialects, you can say. When I started working with OT security in 2009, I'm coming from an IT background, but I was actually figuring out that, okay, I need to sit down and talk to the process engineers. I need to be able to sit down and talk to management, because if you're not able to communicate on the right dialect, and now I'm speaking English in Polen, right? That's not quite the right dialect, but if you're not able to do that, we will not have that success that is needed. And some of my peers, when we are traveling around, believe that this is one of my biggest issues, or our vulnerabilities, you can say, is actually how can we communicate, how can we stress this issue to the C-level or the top management, not because we know to pursue them, but we need to get them to understand. And that's a very big difference. So what I see is we need to be a bridge, or we need to be a translator, and that's why I'm putting this red dot in the middle, to be able to actually communicate on these 3 different dialects or languages, because they are quite different. So thinking of this, that when we are talking about cyber issues in our production environment, we need to, when we're going over and talking to the IT people, we need to understand and talk their language. And what I want to stress here, at least, we need to be able to better to understand the business language. I know that this can be difficult. I also know that this IT vs OT combat job, what we call it, has been speaking out a lot. But when I'm traveling around, it's still a big issue. It's not new, but I need to stress it here as well. It's not because the list is very long, it is, but that's not the point here. The point is actually to understand the differences and adapt them to how we communicate, and be able to talk to the people so they can understand issues. I just took away with some of them. And this might get issue, but what I hear always on the OT, and what we always talk about, safety first. So safety first, and so on. I have this in the bottom here, I call the CIA or AIC triad. You probably heard about that. But in that one, I want to stress out again, because we in OT, we have a different one, because again, safety first. And you probably heard, like me, around when I'm going around, we need to patch. We need to patch all the time. And in OT environment, when I've been around, that is not possible. It's not feasible always. Actually, I was at a plant in Denmark, we were producing pharma stuff, and say, okay, if we're going to patch in the middle in this process, it will take us about 16 weeks of things we can throw out, because we need to have the processes running all the way. So how can we patch a PLC? It will actually lose a lot of money. So we need to think different. Patching isn't the silver bullet. Patching, yes, it's good, but is not the thing. We need to think about it. We need to adapt this IT/OT priority to each other. One thing I would like to stress as well when we are talking about that, as an OT guy, we have a lot to learn from the IT security guys. But the IT security guys has a lot to learn from us as well. So this is not kind of the one or the other. We need actually to be able to communicate better there as well. And being able to do that, we need the third dialect, as I talked about right before, to the management. And for the management one, I want to use some time on that one, because this is actually what I see a lot. If I'm in the US, same issue coming. If I'm in Norway, the same issue is coming. So it doesn't matter. It has a culture aspect, because business has a culture degree. I think it was one of the businessmen in the UK said once, you know, it's like selling a pizza in the different countries. The toppings need to be different. And that's what the culture is. There's different ways to communicate to your top management, or in my country, in Denmark, but we need to be able to understand it. We need to be able to adapt this so we can adapt it to our culture and what fits best. What we have been seeing around is that one thing that is really has been a very bad one, and don't do, is kind of getting too much into technical terms. And why is that? If you look back for the human psychology, I don't want to do a psychology speech here, but thinking about when you were a kid and your mom and dad told you to do something, you did it, but after you grow up, you kind of, no, I don't want to do it, I want to understand. And this is also for a lot of humans, also management. I'm sitting there myself sometimes, and and we need to understand. We don't want to be preserved, right? So we don't want to just push, do this, because we need to, why should I do this? So this is what we need to be able to talk like management. So what I'm saying about here is take on the C-level hat when we are communicating upwards and thinking about, of course, safety first. I've said that quite a time now, but that's focus all the time. But think about talking in processes, talking in business language. Don't go into the technical stuff, but think about what is the business, what is the risk, reputation, and costs. And that's kind of the three ones that actually fits very well a lot of places. So why is that? Because you see that when you're sitting in the board, you're interested in having your company do good, right? And if you are on the stock, you definitely want to do it. We saw a hit on the Norwegian Hydro. It actually dropped the stock 2.26%, which was about, I believe it was a couple of billion Norwegian kroners, which is quite a lot also for a big company like that. So we need to understand the risk, and the business guys are used to talking risk, not cyber risk necessarily, but they used to talk how we communicate, how we get them into. They feel at home. It's not because it's talking risk, it's actually feeling at home, and then they'll start to understand. Feeling comfortable. We need to have them there. Because if we don't feel comfortable, we sustain, right? So we push it away. And what we don't want is people coming, no, you're not getting that budget because I don't understand it. But I don't want to say that, right? So reputation is another thing. We need to pursue our reputation for a company that has a huge impact on the C-level. And of course, how can we go in and work with the costs? How can we get what we need, but not too much? I see a lot, I've been there myself, trying to stress the issues more than necessary sometimes. And when you do that a lot of times, they kind of don't want to talk to you so much more. And that's a problem as well. So this is actually the three very important levers, or actually how you can talk to them. But one thing I need to stress is the bottom one here. Always do your homework. And that has, and everybody says yes, of course. But this is really, And when I'm doing a session, like technical sessions, it's all allowed to kind of, oh, I need to figure out that, I will come back to you. When you're presenting at the board, you have 5-10 minutes and you get some questions. You should have done your homework very, very good, so you can stress what they need to hear, so they can stress how we can go on with this and focus on the business. So I usually do risk, reputation, costs, processes, thinking like the business, and it actually helps because they feel at home. They feel comfortable. And that's kind of one of the most important things. So if we go a bit into the more technical as well, now we are seeing how we can communicate like management a bit. But when you're talking about the adversaries or the hackers, what we all call them, usually you or pen tester use kind of this TTP, what we call the techniques and procedures. I would more like call it the hacking strategy. It's kind of the strategy, how do we actually penetrate something, right? And this is very important because when we are thinking about how we do it, we need to have better understanding of how they are doing it, but then we can actually better protect us. And this is the things we need to think about when we also kind of change the language to the management. So you've probably seen this quite a lot. It's the IEC 62443 for the OT environment. It's not because it's coming from there. There's a lot of different standards, but I wanted to have one that I think has some colorful and actually has a lot of different aspects in it. One of the things I believe is more or less dead is what we call the air-gapped systems. I have seen some of them, but the one that is air-gapped, I haven't really, they think there is air-gap, but it's not. Because as long as you have a firewall or something to connect to something, it's not air-gapped anymore. I've seen one for 2 years ago when they were transporting USB drives to get their production out to the office network. And I can say that even better because USB drives, malware is not the best fix. Then I would say actually it's better to have the communication so we can control it. What is important is actually to understand our systems, so know your systems. And this is actually, do you really know what is happening on your network? I've been a lot of places. I always do a quiz to the process engineer and say, how many protocols do you have running? Oh, we have 5 or then this, okay. Then we go in and sniff it and do a PCAP, and we always find more. It's kind of interesting. And this is going back to know your network, do your homework. Because if you're coming up and think I have this, it's not a really great thing when we're communicating upwards because they want to be sure, right? Again, knowing your network, remember to go into document the critical assets. What we call about which assets, there's always in your production, which assets, if you take that device out, will have a big impact. This is where we start, because if you have 1,000, 2,000 or 5,000 PLCs, you can't really start with everything. It's too big. So which one is the important one? Which one do we prioritize when we're doing this? And that's kind of where we're starting. Normally it's kind of HMI, it's kind of engineer workstations and so on. But you know your production. You need to figure out where is my critical assets. And then when we know that, we can start thinking like the hacker. So if I knew this, how could I do something not that good? Or can I do it? And that's kind of a way. So you actually need to figure out, know your system, your critical assets. You need to understand how can you attack those. Again, back to the name of the presentation, think like a hacker, communicate like a management. And that's kind of very important. When we are talking about the hacker, I always going on and say everybody, oh, it's so easy for the adversary or the hacker. It's not really, it's actually going into a tunnel like this. You don't see it all. It's depending on what you publish as an organization, of course, so we can do this open source intelligence. But sometimes or often you need to test stuff there. So it's kind of noisy. So we hear about, oh, it's so easy because there's only one thing they need right and they're in, right? But they need to do a lot of things before that things. So they will make some noise. And that's why we like this picture here. It's like going in a tunnel. We see a bit, we can't see the whole thing. It will be noisy, you will hit walls, you will and that's where our blue team, our protectors, needs to be to see now there's happening something not normal. So you've probably seen this before. It's called the ICS kill chain. It's an extension that SANS Institute did to the Lockheed Martin ICS kill chain. The first one, the stage 1, right behind me, is the IT, normal IT1. And then we have the stage 2, that is the kind of the ICS, the OT part of it. What is interesting here is that we need to go through all stage 1 and then stage 2 afterwards. If you take the attack on Ukraine, I know it's old, but you can see the steps going through it. And as long as we can stop it once, we can cut it. But, of course, they have different ways, right? So one stream is one going through this one. And you always, as an adversary, they will always try to go in and get different places so they have different ways in, right? But this is a really good one, not only to understand the strategy as a TTPs, but also when you are going back and you've made your critical assets, you need to think like a hacker. You can use this and say, okay, if it's going that, how can I see the different steps going through this? I know it's a lot of strategies, but it actually, a lot of them is using this one. I've been a lot of research to actually filter through this one. So using those technologies makes sense and it makes it easier to see them. It's not so much, and then we can stop them, of course. Like a lot of people in Denmark tells me, like, it's not possible to stop these ATPs. Well, that's not that difficult, all of them. But it's not about always stopping it. It's all about seeing them so you can do something. So how fast can you actually see they're there? Because if you don't use 200 days or 160 days before you actually find out you're under attack, it's kind of late. My closing remarks here is that kind of looking a bit ahead, and that's kind of difficult. But what we have seen is like, we see a lot about ransomware or kind of ransomware. What I can say about that is that the attack on the Norwegian Hydro, maybe heard about, it was kind of a ransomware. It didn't really have, as we know, a decryption key in it. So they sent it out, but they will never be able to decrypt the data. And we saw that with Maersk for a couple of years ago. So what I see and looking ahead on that, we will see more and more ransomware also targeting the OT environment. Not necessarily as the main goal, but it could go in there. We also see that a lot of OT specialists focusing a lot about the OT things or PLCs or different stuff, and that's great. But remember, we have Windows in there as well. So classic Windows malware or OS malware we see on the IT system, we need to have that in mind as well. Because if you're just saying, oh, that's IT stuff, we can get hit. So I believe that we see more and more because a lot of people doesn't look that way right now. And then we see this change, what I call industrial IoT or Industry 4.0 with all these sensors and so on. If you're not thinking it right in for architecture, we will see an attack situation where they can use them as jump hosts or other ways to get into our network. So we see this digitalization really going from the engineers, but we as a cyber guys need to be understanding and go up and say, yes, this is fine for the business, but we need to protect them so and so. And that's why it's really critical, even more in the future, to be able to get the management to understand the issues than actually just letting them put the devices in. So that was actually what I had for today. If you have some questions, I'll be around, and I'm looking forward to a great conference. I'm sure it will be, and see you all around. Thank you very much.